hopefully more people will join us, but just kind of getting the conversation started. My name's Hannah, and I'm the founder of SET Supper Club, and I'm going to be moderating today's discussion. I know about Safe Alliance and Foundations community because I was a case manager at the local mental health authority, which I don't work there anymore, so I think I can say their name. But Integral Care, I was in their crisis residential units during COVID, so that was a pretty interesting time. So I know just how instrumental both Aaron and Jacqueline's organizations are, because we relied on them a lot to help with case management services, and have had really good experiences working together with their organizations. So I'm really so grateful to have both of you here and spending your Saturday with us. And then Megan wants to introduce herself.
I'm Megan, and I'm here to help.
Yeah, Megan's been really awesome and the leader on a lot of the Save Austin Now campaign that we're doing to make sure that petition doesn't go through to the city. And then we'll hear more about our lovely panelists, but up on the top left, I think for everyone, is Aaron DeLaO from Foundations Community, and he is their Director of Health Initiatives. And then we have Jacqueline Smith-Francis, and she is their,
That was my computer.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
She's their Development Officer of Corporate and Organizational Engagement at Safe Alliance. And we'll talk more about their organizations in a little bit. Okay, so for the first poll question, what is transitional homelessness? The correct answer is A, individuals who enter the system for one short stay before they transition into stable housing. B, individuals who are continuously homeless and can be staying on the streets or in emergency shelters is called chronic homelessness, because it's ongoing and they experience it over a long period of time. And then 3 is episodic. So I've seen a lot of that in the crisis residential units. And then an example, a really good example of transitional homelessness is kind of like, I think in Jacqueline's work at Safe Alliance, she might see a lot of that. A lot of people who are experiencing domestic violence or sexual abuse, they have to escape their current situation. And so they make use of different shelters and respite units, and then they're able to find a new, safer house.
Very right. That's true.
So yeah, and then for question number 2, yes, you guys, most of you guys answered having been pushed out of the city by Save Austin Now. That is not an self-identified challenge, but that is a very imminent danger that we're trying to combat, because we don't want them to move too far away from the downtown area. That's where a lot of the resources are who serve the population experiencing homelessness. And we just want to make sure that we don't give them any more barriers to access, because if we push them out to, like, say, Camp Rat, which is like way outside of that downtown area, it's really hard for people experiencing homelessness to get bus passes to travel there. They often don't have directions. So it's just so harmful all around. And just to give you percentages of the responses, 43% of those polled by ECHO, and we'll get to definitions shortly, reported that they've experienced being beat up or attacked while experiencing homelessness, and a lot of that have tended to be females. And I've seen a lot of that personally in my work. So it's just kind of like that double whammy of already experiencing homelessness and then also dealing with domestic abuse and not knowing whether or not to file police report. is another topic.
Yeah.
Well, one that intersects, I think, with both of our communities, you know, foundation communities and even Safe Alliance. It's a very complicated issue, I think, for all of our clients.
Yeah.
Many of them.
So thank you for answering those poll questions. And before we get started, I am going to allow the attendees to talk and show their video if you would like. So I think that would make for a better conversation. Cool. Okay. So just a few, we did this last week, so if you joined us last week, this may be information that you already have, but Aaron and Jacqueline, we're just gonna go over some commonly used phrases that maybe like the general public might not know, just so if these words and terms do come up, we are able to they already public knowledge. There's Camp Rat, that is the designated by Governor Abbott.
You don't have to show video.
Sorry?
That's my mom.
Okay.
You can go ahead and mute.
That's adorable. I love it. It's awesome.
I was like, okay. So Camp Rat is the responsible adult transition town. It's located down south, next to Montopolis. And Governor Abbott kind of used that as a to push people out of sight, which is pretty harmful. So that might come up. It's sometimes also referred to as Abbott Town. And then echo coordinated assessment. I feel like that will come up a lot when we're talking with Aaron. That is, ECHO stands for Ending Community Homelessness Coalition. They're a local nonprofit 501c3 who uses like a coordinated entry system. So instead of going to different organizations and asking for their services, you take this coordinated assessment, and then they'll give you the options of like, depending on your score, what services actually work best for you. So part of Foundation's community is the prerequisite is to have the CA done before you can enter into their housing service. And then CTOSH is a listserv through UT Austin. Sometimes different organizations in Austin will use that as a way to coordinate services and ask for advice, which has been really helpful when I was a case manager. And then MAP insurance, it's just the medical access program. So it offers health insurance to those who might not have otherwise eligible for like Medicare or Medicaid. And then that's pretty much all. So I feel like I've been talking a lot.
No.
And now I will not talk so much. We'll give the floor to both Aaron and Jacqueline. Starting with Aaron, can you please tell us a bit about yourself, what your background is, and how you came to be the Director of Health Initiatives at Foundation's community?
Thanks, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be here today. I'm a public administrator by education, and I've been practicing in community health here in Austin since 2008. I've had experience as a case manager for uninsured folks when I started my career initially, and I've spent the past 10 years leading operations, administration, strategic planning, and programming for community health clinics here in Austin. I chose to work at FC after working in health clinics and operations because it became really clear to me that working in health clinics wasn't the only place to advance health for folks. In our country, we spend so much on interventions for chronic illness and diseases that are preventable, and not enough really on supporting social systems that lead to people being healthier. FC is a very special place because we help people lead healthier lives, because we provide housing, which is affordable which is one of the basic tenets of being healthy. We also provide wraparound support to folks so that they can better their financial situation, navigate complicated, bureaucratic, and sometimes impossible systems like healthcare and education, getting their taxes done. What I found when I first started my career as a very inexperienced case manager supporting people who had no health insurance was that we could provide them medical care for all day long. But if they didn't have stable housing, if they couldn't afford to pay for their prescriptions, if they had no transportation, if they had no job improvement prospects, if they couldn't find high quality childcare, if they couldn't find access to any social support services, then it really didn't matter how much we did for them in the clinic. Their health outcomes were going to continue to be poor. It was a real wake-up call for me when I had a client who was in such a desperate health situation and had severe hypertension. Like, we're talking stroke level hypertension. She was basically experiencing homelessness because she was forced into a sexual relationship with a man to be able to stay with him in his hotel. I thought to myself, how are we going to make her healthy if all we do is give her a higher and higher dose of blood pressure medication? And if we didn't help empower her and partner with her to try and get her out of that living situation, would the medicine even make a difference? That wasn't the only thing that she needed. That client's situation stuck with me my entire career because it supplants in me that health doesn't happen inside the four walls of a clinic solely. It's what happens outside that truly affects health, where people live, what they have access to, and it's all those things that we call social determinants of health. I was lucky enough to know about FC throughout my career here in Austin as a really wonderful place that helps a lot of people. And so when the opportunity came to be a part of that mission of creating housing where families succeed, I took it. And I've now been here since October of 2018.
Thank you so much for sharing all that information. We're so excited to get more into those, just because, yeah, so much of health is committed to food insecurity, and a lot of those social determinants of health are just so rooted in systemic discrimination. Thank you. And then Jacqueline, also please give us a little bit about your background and what you currently do at Safe Alliance, and also maybe explain a little bit about how Safe Alliance came to be in terms of the merger between Safe Place and then Austin Children's Center.
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, perfect. I really appreciate this opportunity, Hannah and Megan. This is a beautiful forum. I'm already so excited just based on what Aaron said and how you introduced the space. I'm like, yes. So those are all the things that SAFE is really engaged in. My name is Jacqueline Smith-Francis. I've been in Austin probably about 15 years now. I came by way of California before all the Californians started coming and before Trader Joe's came. But I came for grad school at UT Austin. And I actually, when I first came, I was wanting to engage with a nonprofit or a community group committed to addressing interpersonal violence. That was kind of my background in women's and gender studies. In undergrad and in California, I worked for a time for the California legislature and worked on the health committee and housing committee. And so I've always really been very committed and intimately connected to conversations around disproportionality and health equity. I'm from Oakland, California. And so growing up in that community and seeing the kind of widespread disparities as it relates to housing resources, as it relates to health outcomes, substance abuse, interpersonal violence, those things have really shaped who I am as a person, but also as a professional. And so when I first came to Austin, I enrolled in the Safe Alliance's core advocate training, which is a 40-hour program that we still have. And then it was Safe Place. And I wanted to learn more about trauma and the ways in which interpersonal violence impacted individuals and why there were cycles of violence and the ways in which it related to other forms of oppression and harm. And what I will then say is that I kind of went to grad school, worked at a yoga studio, did a lot of other variety of community work, and then I came back to SAFE and about 3 years ago and started with their community education team. And then I moved over into fundraising, and that's been also a really humbling and interesting experience. As Hannah said, I work primarily with organizations, faith communities, and businesses that would like to partner and engage with SAFE in terms of supporting survivors. And one of the things that makes me so proud about the work at the SAFE Alliance is that it's been going on for 46 years. It started originally as the Rape Crisis Center in the early 1970s. And I always describe it as kind of a little house with a bunch of dedicated women and some great men who were literally like answering a rotary phone and saying, okay, we have a pallet on the floor, bring your kids, you know, and it was very DIY. It's like so many of the movements in terms of providing supportive housing for individuals who are experiencing homelessness, just like for the individuals who are experiencing interpersonal violence. It started from the ground up, and it's become these kind of robust, larger organizations, but they really started with people who are committed to creating change in their communities. And that's what gives me so much personal fulfillment when I'm able to have conversations like this. And so over the course of these 46 years, SAFE has grown into being 2 campuses. And in 2017, Austin's Children's Shelter and the SAFE Place merged to become the SAFE Alliance. And really we did that because we were seeing young people impacted by teen dating violence or child abuse when they were under the age of, say, 18. And then we were seeing them come right back into our doors as adults impacted by domestic violence or sex trafficking. And we said, something is wrong. We need to be able to kind of talk to one another, from case managers to larger bureaucratic systems, the health department, law enforcement, and really create a conversation around why cycles of violence happen. Why is it that a child who experiences child abuse is 6 times more likely to also experience other forms of interpersonal violence as they age? And we said, you know, something is wrong with that. And so now the SAFE Alliance in 2020 has over 30 different programs under its umbrella that include everything from direct intervention, where someone is coming to us because they are being harmed by someone in an intimate relationship or they experience sexual assault. SAFE is the #1 provider of sexual assault exams in Travis County, and we feel really good about that. We learned early on that, hey, there was no reason why survivors needed to go into emergency rooms in order to have sexual assault exams. It was cost prohibitive for taxpayers. It wasn't trauma informed for someone who just experienced assault and was waiting in a waiting room for 8 and 7 hours by themselves. And we found that we could really do it in a trauma informed way, but also be able to connect survivors to other stable resources within the community. And so we're really proud of that. And along with those kind of direct intervention services, we also have an advocacy model that really works around life empowerment. How do we talk about resiliency and agency? And we really believe in that in terms of having a therapeutic model that provides individual and group counseling, ongoing case management, connecting with resources like ECHO and foundation communities to provide more stable housing. And just to pivot really quickly, this is a crisis that SAFE is really addressing. I mean, in my role as a fundraiser, I'm working a lot with city officials and private businesses around how do we create stable housing for survivors of interpersonal violence. It's a huge crisis. It's that even when they come to our shelter and are able to move into a more stable situation, they can't afford to do so. Or if they have a criminal background, and we're not talking about danger to community criminal background, maybe there's a marijuana charge or a situation in which their credit report, or they have unpaid parking tickets, things that do not pose a direct threat to society, but have disproportionately impacted them and made it difficult for them to find safe housing and stable housing. And I learned recently that a lot of times our clients with backgrounds like this are asked to pay 2 and 3 times more in a deposit and for their rent. And already they're coming with tremendous trauma. They are scared and concerned. They have difficulty finding like safe and reliable childcare, and all of these adverse life situations, coupled with then trying to find the basic kind of Maslow hierarchy of needs of food, shelter, and well-being. And so, and again, so many of people are like, why do you guys have 30 programs? And that's like, it's grown out of listening to survivors, the tremendous needs, and why we've moved from a rotary telephone, you know, and a small house with pallets for people to stay the night or a week, to, you know, supportive housing programs that are more around the 12th month to 18th month time frame. And in addition to that, working more diligently with legislature, with policy initiatives to support survivors, whether it be rape kit processing, but also fair housing, access to good food and nutrition. I love what Aaron said in terms of like, you know, we can continue to provide all of the access and resources for individuals to have the medications they need or to see physicians, but if they have nowhere to stay, if they have nowhere to safely school their children, that's a problem. And so we also have a charter school, K through 12 charter school on SAFE's campus, but we also engage in a lot of prevention and education work. And it's about changing the ways in which society thinks about violence. We know that violence and abuse doesn't happen in a vacuum. And because of that, it's not only about addressing and supporting those who are impacted by interpersonal violence, but changing the culture that makes violence acceptable.
Thank you so much. There's so much wisdom in there. I can't wait to really like unpack more of it. I know you spoke a little bit more already about the risk factors that happen. Yeah. Can you be a little bit more explicit in explaining like just why it's so difficult for people who experience trauma and abuse to move into permanent housing and not just transitional housing?
Most definitely. What we know is that by the time someone comes to us and feels comfortable disclosing the type of violence or abuse that they've experienced, they've already experienced compounded trauma oftentimes. Individuals who come to us as adults are oftentimes survivors of childhood abuse, be it physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual forms of abuse. And so we also know that we have a culture in which people don't feel very safe talking about the abuse that they experienced. A lot of times, child abuse and childhood incest is something that families do not talk about, communities don't talk about. So there's a lot of shame and guilt. One of the first things that we're doing when survivors come to us is letting them know that it's never their fault. No one has a right to hurt or violate your body or your boundaries. We're also doing a lot of education around the ways in which having housing insecurity and economic insecurity also creates scenarios, kind of what Aaron mentioned about his former client, in which people become engaged in things, what we sometimes call a survival sex, that I will work with somebody or meet someone who provides housing or food or some form of shelter and support that I am desperately in need of and deserve as a human being on this planet, right? And then I will then use sex or whatever I can to ensure that I kind of meet those basic needs. And that becomes a really difficult power exchange. And what we also work really hard to dispel is that violence and abuse doesn't happen because of mental health conditions. It doesn't happen because of someone using alcohol or drugs. Violence and abuse happens because of power and control. And a lot of times, because we don't talk about power and control, and we don't talk about societal inequities and oppression, we believe that people hurt one another because they're intoxicated, or people hurt someone because, I think recently, and I'll say this just because I stay involved in popular culture, like with Megan Thee Stallion, right? Here is a Black woman artist and rapper, celebrity. And here it is that she's in a situation in which her very life is in danger. And a lot of times it's difficult to be able to talk about those things. And here's a person who has access to socioeconomic advantage, yet because of her status as a woman, because of her status as a Black woman, there's still a lot of criticism. There's still a lot of unexplained inequities oftentimes that then compound the likelihood that someone can experience violence and abuse. Furthermore, we then live in a society in which the people who use violence are oftentimes given license to do so. So we will hear common stereotypes like, well, what was she wearing? Or why was she out with another man if that wasn't her boyfriend or her husband, or different things like that? Why did they aggravate the individual? You shouldn't talk to your spouse in this type of way. And so we've created a culture in which we oftentimes make excuses for people who use violence. And we're really committed to education that teaches us that everyone has the right to their own body. Consent is very, very clear. It means yes. And if you don't receive a declarative yes, people shrugging their shoulders, people saying, I don't know, people not responding at all means that the answer is no. and teaching that, but we don't grow up in a society where we're able to oftentimes have those conversations. And so because of all of those cross-sectional issues in our society, as well as historical forms of oppression like racism, homophobia and transphobia, socioeconomic class systems that oftentimes US society we don't like to address as a reality, we create a system in which people are unfairly disadvantaged and therefore don't have the power and the resources to change those different types of historical and contemporary setbacks that they and their children experience. And just like we know that wealth is generational, and I often say, as an example, if your parent or your grandparent allows you to, you inherit their home, that's generational wealth, right? And if your grandparents were immigrants to this country, or your grandparents were immigrants to this country, perhaps they did not have the same opportunities to build wealth because of oftentimes discrimination for immigrants, discrimination against people of color. They're not able to transfer or create that type of wealth. And so generations then become more distanced and removed from those very things that allow someone to progress. And a lot of times we don't think about those things as historical inequities that then actually translate and manifest in our contemporary landscape. And all of that compounds to create difficulties in which survivors have a hard time getting back on their feet, so to say, when after they've experienced violence and abuse. And I'll just add one more thing, that even before we oftentimes experience physical abuse, there's been multiple forms of psychological and emotional and mental abuse. And that's very important to understand, that we not criticize survivors and say, well, why haven't you left them? Why haven't you left her? And we have to understand that even before someone is oftentimes physically abused, there's been ongoing erosion of their self-esteem and their self-worth, oftentimes beginning long before the current partnership in which they reach out for help to save and say, I'm in an unsafe place.
Thank you for bringing that, because it really does tie, like everything is really tied to mental health and the protective factors that are necessary for us to build up in the community. And there are so many ways that they can be easily implemented if we could just kind of join together and work towards that. So just to kind of revisit the self-report poll from ECHO, 39% of people experiencing homelessness self-reported that they experienced domestic violence prior to experiencing homelessness. And then also 70% of all those polled have reported past trauma or abuse. So that's like very much interrelated. And then 70% currently have no planned activities that bring them happiness. So a lot of depression and anxiety really does make it difficult for you, as you mentioned, and as SET is formulated around the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. and you don't have your basic needs met, it's really difficult to start thinking about protective factors and avoiding traumatic and crisis situations.
Yes.
So I feel that's a really good transition to ask Aaron if he can spread a little bit more information about, from his role as Director of Health Initiatives, what are the effects of homelessness on health, and also what are some protective factors that do exist for people who could experience a higher quality of life.
Yeah, thanks. So I think that first we need to acknowledge that homelessness is a public health issue. It's a economic issue. It has impacts and touches so much of our lives, even when you are able to have a stable home. And having a diagnosis of a severe persistent mental illness that exacerbates and contributes to being homeless or experiencing homelessness is also not a crime, and neither is being homeless in general. And so I think as a society, we have to get to the point where we understand that homelessness and that effect that it has on so many rippling effects on so many different aspects of life needs to be addressed. And it can't be ignored. We can't push people who are homeless into the shadows just because they are homeless or experiencing homelessness. And I think we could probably spend all day talking about the effects that experiencing homelessness has on people's health. I'll highlight some of them now, but there's just so many ways that not having a home, not having a stable home can affect how we live and our quality of life. Those who are experiencing homelessness experience tremendous amounts of pain and suffering due to not being housed. Living on the street or in homeless shelters where they're crowded and stressful is worse because they are exposed to communicable diseases like tuberculosis and respiratory illnesses, flu, hepatitis. They have to endure violence, malnutrition, have no shelter from harmful weather exposure. Their chronic health diseases, if they have them, like high blood pressure and diabetes and asthma, become worse because there's no safe space for them to store medications, or they're being robbed for their insulin or medications that they have, thinking that there are other types of drugs. And so they're often just living this constant trauma of not being able to control their chronic disease because they can't maintain their medication for that. Maintaining a healthy diet is also really challenging for people who are experiencing homeless because they depend on irregular food sources. They have little choice in what they get to eat because they're dependent on fast food or food that's donated to food pantries and soup kitchens, which often have higher concentrations of sugar and salt. And we know those have a direct link to exacerbating people's chronic diseases like diabetes and hypertension. They suffer from mental illness that's uncontrolled or undiagnosed, depression, schizophrenia, anxiety, paranoia, substance use disorders that can develop and are made worse because of these living environments that are really difficult, challenging situations. And they also have no hope because it seems like their situation's never going to improve. And so that just exacerbates their mental health diagnosis as well. Not getting good rest and sleep, as we all know, is detrimental to anyone's health. And it's worse for those who are experiencing homelessness because they don't have that security of a home to go home to that helps ease our anxieties after a tough day of work and being able to come home to a refuge. They don't have that refuge. So they're in a constant state of hyperarousal, mental state of fight or flight. And when we are in that kind of state, we have a chemical called cortisol, and many of us are familiar with that is just constantly running through our bodies that exacerbates our weight gain. It makes us be unhealthy. It adds to our stress load. We carry a large amount of stress when we can't rest ourselves, and we are constant in this feeling of needing to run, and our security and safety is at risk. And people who are experiencing homelessness are in that state almost all day long for days, years. Many parts of their lives are just tied to this experience. And so it just adds to all, like, fuel to their fire of their mental health diagnosis. When those who are experiencing homelessness get injuries, they lack access to hygiene, like showers regularly. So a lot of times they don't have wound care that leads to an increased infection, cellulitis, all sorts of ways that they also then need not only for the wound treatment and wound care, but they need antibiotics because they got a secondary infection. And then they have stigma when they go to the doctor or the emergency room because they are experiencing homelessness and they're not clean and they have this wound that's infected and they just have let it go too long and require sometimes a hospital stay because of that, which is expensive. They also suffer a lot of violence. So fighting, because people have often uncontrolled or undiagnosed mental health diagnoses, there's a lot of fighting that occurs. There's a lot of violence that happens, but they're also taken advantage of by other people and treated really badly when they're on the street trying to get any sort of donation of money so that they can get food. Just having that constant struggle and violence geared towards them really changes people's psychological perspective and feeling like there is no safe space for them. There's nowhere to go, that nobody wants them. And it makes them feel very isolated and very hard when they are experiencing that violence. Again, when they experience violence that's very physical in nature, they have wounds or injuries to their head or their bodies that they just can't get attention onto. And so then it's just exacerbated even further, again, leading to hospitalizations, long hospitalization stays when they could have been prevented from the onset. Many health conditions it's complex level of physical issues, mental health issues, substance use and social problems, poor health, high stress, unhealthy and dangerous environments, and the inability to control food intake leads to those emergency room visits that often could have been prevented. And it just taxes our healthcare system, makes it very expensive for us economically as a society because we're paying for the cost of those emergency room visits. If they have public insurance, obviously we're supporting that through taxpayer dollars. If they don't have insurance and they go to the hospital for one of these long-term hospitalizations, then we have to cover that in uncompensated care because there is no insurance payer. So that hurts us as a society, it hurts our economy, it hurts us as taxpayers as well. And really, it's financially exhaustive for us, but when we think about the impact on those people, on the people that are experiencing that pain and suffering, there's no way to measure that and quantify that effect on them. People who are experiencing homelessness have higher rates of illness, die on average 12 years sooner than the general US population. Simply being without a home is a dangerous health condition, and so much pain and suffering occurs for those experiencing it. Jackie talked about kind of the systemic kind of a tradition of poverty that's occurring because people can't transfer wealth. And so when they're experiencing these, one setback, one financial hard situation will lead them to that transitional state of homelessness where they have a medical bill that is too high for them to pay, because we live in a society that accepts the fact that when somebody has cancer or some other chronic disease that's uncontrolled, they have to have a GoFundMe page just to be able to survive, just to be able to eat. That's the kind of society that we live in, that we accept that that's okay. And so we just really exacerbate all of those problems. We compound that for them because they are already barely making it. And then they have this huge exorbitant fees of healthcare costs that they can't afford. They end up losing their homes, they lose their apartment, they lose their house, their mortgage goes into bankruptcy or into foreclosure, and they have to become bankrupt and end up living in the streets. People that might not have even experienced that ever in their lives, but because of our society and the fact that we have so much inequity with healthcare and lack of access and the fact that healthcare is so expensive, it just contributes to that. So it's really just a really bad situation all the way around. And I think when we think of, a lot of times when people think about those who are experiencing homelessness as a problem, they're not really thinking about the problem that made that happen. That's a product of a system of failure that people have been living in since the beginning of our country. Industrial Revolution time, the fact that we were roaring 20s, had the best economy in the world, led to so much poverty because people still, even though they had a job, couldn't make ends meet. They couldn't make it work. And we still are living in that today in our society. The same problems that existed 100 years ago, we're in the exact same boat we are now. And so it's just really challenging, and especially when you think about movements that want to criminalize people who are experiencing homelessness, often through no choice of their own, and the health complications that they have. It's just really sad to think that our society lets that happen.
I think so much of it is just like the stigma that comes with just being ignorant, like not having the tools to understand like issues like this, because the dialogue is often kind of siloed into like people who are in the industry or like people who are adjacent to it. So I want to highlight my friend Jacqueline. She's actually working on a really cool project to kind of make exercise not just you know, a wealthy person thing, or just like attractive to people who are able to wear, you know, cute outfits and go to the gym and they know what they're doing because they were able to take classes or have a personal trainer. And so like having exercise classes and building community around things like that are protective factors, I think are so important. And we just need to make more room and be able to support each other's initiatives in that way, because there can be so much that can be done on a personal basis as we start to talk about these issues more. So I'm just so grateful, and I've learned so much just hearing like how eloquently you speak, Jackie and Aaron, about your expertise, and like you guys are so awesome.
Well, we feel the same way about you, like just holding a forum. I mean, I think it's been beautiful to engage with you, Hannah, and Aaron, to just see the intersections and the overlap. And like, I love what Aaron was saying, that like, until we change as a society to kind of embody what Martin Luther King referred to as the beloved community, and Gandhi too, I don't think either of our issues are going, and the interlapping of our issues, right? So many of survivors of interpersonal violence are individuals who've experienced homelessness, and so many individuals who have experienced homelessness are also survivors of trauma. And until we kind of believe that everyone has a right to have shelter and to have access to sustainable and good food and a quality of life in terms of health care, and to know that their kids are safe, yeah.
And also relying on social supports, right? So having a wealth of social supports,
Yes.
their own families,
Yes.
friends, community, organizations that are helping and just there for them. So many
Yes.
who are experiencing homelessness because of that stigma don't have that protective factor that we have,
Yes.
that we all get to enjoy because of the fact that they are experiencing homelessness. And so I think that's an important aspect, that if we don't allow people to wrap those people in support,
Yes.
the feelings that they have of isolation, the feelings that they have that things won't get better, that really changes their brain structure and how they view the world and the ability to actually get out of their situation. They don't have hope to do that because our society doesn't allow them to have that hope. Something that I take for granted with a lot of privilege every single day, all of my social support systems that just don't exist for them.
Right. And experiencing homelessness in and of itself is such a traumatic event.
Yes.
Just every day, the hypervigilance, it's just so,
Yes.
you know, there's so many physical health issues with that, but especially for mental health, as we've been saying multiple times, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're not really able to think about like protective factors or using coping skills when you are experiencing trauma, especially if it's kind of crisis mode. You know, COVID-19 is a global pandemic. It's a shared global trauma, and that's exacerbated with experiencing homelessness, and then also having a petition and sweeps that are happening, and then not having access to your medication, and then waiting a long time to even enter into services through Integral Care, Safe Alliance, or
Yes, that's true.
barriers, things that you have to do. And so, especially with like, we talked about this a bit last week, when the sweeps happen in the city, a lot of people lose their IDs, their birth certificates,
Medications.
and, yes, and so you're entering, if you are already experiencing trauma and have a mental illness and you don't have access to your prescription,
That further exacerbates your health condition.
Exactly. Unless you are committed to emergency situation, like not of your own accord. And again, as you were saying, then you have all of these medical bills and costs that MAP insurance doesn't cover. And then the line to get, even if you have like a SOAR specialist, so SOAR specialists help individuals who are like at a poverty line kind of have accelerated process to get their Medicaid or Medicare approved, but that's not even a guarantee that you will be able to receive those services.
And then are you aware of the services? That's what we always talk about, SAFE. Like, do you know that we're there? Do you know that it's possible to have a SOAR specialist?
Right.
You know?
And navigating systems that, to Jackie's point, that aren't trauma informed. So they're coming to a clinic to try and get a doctor after waiting for months to see a physician to get deemed disabled, to be able to get Medicare, Medicaid. They're having to sit in a waiting room where they feel unsafe. They're being stigmatized. They're being called, their name is being called. People who are experiencing homelessness are constantly around people who are yelling and fighting. And so when they come into some of these public systems, they get their names called and it triggers them because they've had that trauma. And all of our systems, education, healthcare, taxes, legal, all of those, the justice system right now, law enforcement, those are not trauma informed or trauma responsive. They're created in a way that's easy for the people doing the work. And I can say that because I've been doing the work. And so I know firsthand what it's like when we create these systems that are not trauma informed, that people still have to be triggered because they just need help. And so instead of being a place of help, especially for people of color, instead of being a place of help, it ends up creating a system where they don't feel comfortable in coming in the door because we've set it in a system that set it up in a way that is convenient for the people providing the service, not necessarily for those coming in. And so it just adds so much to that inability to get out of that feeling of like they can't get out of homelessness.
I appreciate you saying that too, because then it also compounds with like the intersection. So then if I am a trans woman who is an immigrant and not from this country, and I don't, maybe my first language isn't English and I have a wound, am I concerned about if they're going to ask about my documentation? Where are my papers? I'm concerned about if they're going to be responsive and supportive to me as a trans woman. Are they going to use my dead name or my dead pronouns? Like all of these different things that in one experience of just going to the window to say, I need help, layers of trauma have happened just in that moment, not to mention the historical trauma in which I'm carrying. So,
great. And just to rewind a little bit, just to plug our panel from last week, we had Mark from Sunrise Community Church. And
nice.
A lot of the services that church was able to offer, like holding mail, helping people with transportation to get prescription services. It's just so necessary, and it's really sad that we are reliant on NGOs and non-governmental, NGOs is a non-governmental organization, but like nonprofits and religious organizations to be able to do public services out of their own money that I kind of just feel like should be basic human rights.
And I 100% agree. Like I was literally, I know Aaron and I probably both, I was like crying on the phone talking to a member who University Presbyterian Church is working on a pilot program to do more supportive services and partner with other faith communities to support survivors and to support other nonprofits. And it just reminded me of another great faith community called St. George's, who they put together for SAFE the kind of sexual assault care kits that every survivor receives, which has like, you know, resources, things like a stress ball, like these just very comforting things that we think we should all have access to in the midst of a traumatic event. And I was in tears because I just felt like, why is it that a faith community per se has to come together to do that? how is it that we haven't, as a society, especially when we understand ourselves as a first world society, right? First world, and that's a problematic term, but with so many resources, we have grocery stores on every corner, which means that we have more than enough food, but yet we have tremendous food insecurity. We have access to the state of art technology. We have electric cars, all of these things, and yet we can't provide enough housing for individuals who can't afford to pay for that. And somehow that seems like just fundamentally unjust in a nation that has so much wealth.
So kind of piggybacking off of that, Jackie, Aaron, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about why Foundation's community has adopted a case management model in terms of housing and why that is effective. And then also if you wanted to expand a little bit about why your other services, because just like Safe Alliance has like 30 programs, I know Foundation's community also has like 50 million services going on too. But like, I know with the stipend, like from the government for COVID-19 relief, tax services was a really huge thing. So we really appreciated Foundation's community for helping individuals experiencing homelessness get their taxes filed. So yeah, just kind of walk us through coordinated assessment to housing and then other services that Foundation's community does.
Yeah, so, and I will admit I'm not the expert on how folks get into housing through the coordinated assessment, because my department really wraps around folks once they're in housing. But and we have various programs, right, for case management where there is intersectionality with their coordinated assessment through ECHO and being able to be linked to the appropriate program within Foundation communities. And so the case management, so we understand that case management and supportive housing. So the act of providing this wraparound support system around folks that are coming in, often from experiencing homelessness, they just, to prevent them from going back, it's important to provide that wraparound support through case management. Having folks that listen to them, navigate systems, get the care that they need, treat them with respect and dignity when they often were not treated that way previously. We understand that that's important. And so we kind of offer it in 3 different departments, case management services in 3 different departments. I oversee one of those departments where we provide case management, but the other 2, one of them is our single adult properties. We call them single resident occupant or SROs. My colleague, Sophia Barbado, oversees the programs and services within those properties. There's 6 of them right now in Austin. And they really help people navigate medical issues, because so many of those folks that are single adults have a lot of chronic diseases. They have mental health diagnoses. They need to navigate the system to improve their health. They're also helping them navigate through Social Security and disability, linking them to mental health services for management of their behavioral health diagnoses, providing financial stability, basic needs support, employment support. We have a relationship with Austin Clubhouse where we can provide supported employment within Foundation communities for some of our residents. And then in our Children's Home Initiative, which is at our family properties, we have 12 of those of our 14 that have, 11 of those of our 14 family properties here in Austin have case managers on site for folks that are at risk or had experienced homelessness to come in and get even more reduced or more affordable housing in a 2-year program where they're increasing financial stability, helping them with job coaching and finding jobs, helping make sure their kids are linked to health insurance, many different aspects of just improving their financial situation so that they can be prevented from going back into homelessness. And then my program, Health Initiatives, we have kind of 2 different case management programs. One is led by community health workers in our community. So folks that are more peers of those living within our properties that are helping them navigate healthcare, resources for medications, health education. Our CHWs are trained to provide health education, trying to motivate people to come to fitness classes, because we also provide fitness classes at almost all of our properties for our residents and the community. And so linking them to that, linking them to our food pantry, because we operate 12 healthy food pantries giving out 446,000 pounds of food last year alone in 2019. So linking them to that. And then we have a team of social workers, master level social workers who are clinicians providing counseling services to our families because they need mental health services. We know in Austin, we know in our country, in our state and our country, that mental health services are a huge gap in health services for folks. And so we provide some of that to our residents as well. We just understand that that support, that methodology of providing case management, helping people build upon their own natural skills, their own ability to thrive, their own empowerment is so key to helping people live a higher quality of life. And so we really do try and put a lot of resource and effort to maintain that relationship with folks so that they can stay housed. And really our goal is to help improve their financial situation so that they can remain permanently housed in general.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say on the panel last week or week before last, one thing that like stuck out with me the most was like one of the most important parts in keeping someone permanently housed is aftercare, mental health aftercare. You know, so to have an entire system working for you, not just like here's a house, dropping you off.
Yeah.
You know, like that's not gonna fly, you know. So it's great to hear like how encompassing every aspect of Foundations is.
Yeah. And we, you know, while our case management services are provided for our residents, the host of programs that we provide are open to the community. As y'all mentioned, the tax center, we provide 20,000 tax returns a year. I think it's like $35 million annually in tax returns back to folks. And that's not only in Austin. We also provide 13,000 in North Texas. We have 3 properties in North Texas as well. And so that's one program, helping people enroll in the Affordable Care Act insurance products during open enrollment, which happens every fall. We do that for the community as well. Our fitness classes are open to the community. And right now, because of COVID, they're all virtual. So speaking of what y'all were mentioning earlier, we want to make sure that our folks, even if they don't have a lot of money, even if they are challenged in so many different ways, they can have access to, we have a meditation class going on. We have yoga, we have Zumba, we have Zumba-thons virtually. We have sitting Zumba. We have all sorts of these kind of programs just to help people improve, get their body moving. Exactly, get their body moving in the comfort of their home now so that they can lead a healthier life. Our food pantries are open to the community. It's not just for our residents. So that 446,000 pounds of food that we provided in 2019 is open to anybody in Austin who needs food support. And that has been, we've seen 100% increase since COVID-19 has been affecting us in March. Of people coming to our pantries. We've already given out 220,000 pounds of food from March to June just because of COVID and the increased needs that we have here. Over 5,600 people have gotten food from us. And so it's just really important to know that all of these support systems, even if we can't provide case management, Foundation Communities is doing so much to help all sorts of community members that need help. They might have housing somewhere else, but that doesn't prevent them from getting help from us as well. And then again, the other reason why our case management services are closed specifically for our residents is because my department led a community needs assessment in 2019. We found that 57% of our residents are experiencing one or more mental health diagnoses. 31% are experiencing hypertension. 19% are experiencing diabetes. 51% of our residents are food insecure. 26% report not having enough money to cover their daily needs. So we have, and there's just capacity issues, like all nonprofit organizations, there's just capacity issues. We would love to be able to take on even more for the community to meet some of those needs, but we have so much need with our own resident population that we are focusing our energy and attention to make sure that they're successful. And that's one of the reasons why our case management programs are closed to just our residents.
Yeah, and I think with ARCH too, there's a common misconception, even with case managers at Integral Care, just thinking that all the services at ARCH are open, which they do have some services like their mail service. They're able to check their mail there and use that address. But even the food kitchen at ARCH and their sleeping, their housing program there are only really open to men. And I think like that's why the Save Austin Now petition, another like major harmful thing is they're spreading so much misinformation of like, well, we'll push them out and they could just go to more shelters and Arch. But they're also not supporting Arch, and they don't know how like Foundations Community works, how Safe Alliance works, how Arch works, Trinity Center, any of those organizations that are doing tireless work to help this population. You know, they also have case management because Arch has been trying to transition into like more permanent housing, so that way they're able to transition a larger number of people into permanent housing rather than just like putting a band-aid over something. But there are still so many people who are not being served, and so like the food pantries and tax management services and like bailout funds are really important. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that. I just feel like there is so many misconceptions against what the organizations actually are doing.
Wow.
So
Yeah, and you would think.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just I would say that you would think that that's the approach that we should be coming out of. I think the fact that we are able to now see the ramifications of homelessness on our city, that they're not lost in the shadows anymore, they're not hidden, and we're not criminalizing them just because they're experiencing homelessness, then these folks that are fighting against that should really, okay, well, how can we support so that those folks don't even actually have to be homeless, or the problem doesn't have to be exacerbated in that way? And we're not doing that. We're not investing in those things either. So you can't have it where you just want to push people into the shadows and not help them, and then when they come out, just do nothing to support them either. So you have to have a mix of, you know, let's bring them out, let's not criminalize them, and then let's support them, wrap them in support so that they can get the things that they need to be housed, to live a higher quality of life, to be successful. I think the conception that people want to be homeless still exists. And it is just so crazy to me that people think that this is a choice that people are making. It's a system that we've created, that we've maintained, that is creating that to happen, not because they just want to be there. They don't want to have security. We fundamentally, as humans, throughout our entire existence, have wanted a place to call home, wanted some protection. And so it's not an innate feeling to just say, I want to live on the street and be, you know, experiencing so much trauma every single day of my life. That's not part of our human experience.
no, not at all.
I appreciate you saying that too, Aaron, because oftentimes there's just misconception along with survivors, particularly those who are in sex trafficking or in situations of domestic violence. Like, well, if they, you know, wanted to leave, they would just leave. And it's like, there's all these compounded problems that create a situation in which someone stays. Right. And the same thing for homelessness. You know, I think it's like many of us are just one paycheck away, one large medical catastrophe away. And I think if we put ourselves in each other's shoes and think about how easy it is in this country to lose stability through something catastrophic like a job loss or a medical condition, or even, dare I say, COVID-19, right? In terms of the large, widespread socioeconomic gap in economic support because of job loss and because of food insecurity and all of these different things. That's how quickly it happens. And I also appreciate you highlighting too, Hannah, just the different roles that nonprofits play, because one of the things when people sometimes ask me at SAFE, they were like, well, you know, isn't it enough that you guys have these 2 shelters? And I'm like, our waiting list is like 50 and 60 people. And that's just to get into our family shelter, right? And then you have to have, what about the support for staff? Can we talk about paying staff a living wage to work with and support individuals who have complex trauma and need widespread wraparound support? And so it's really interesting that I think sometimes it really begins with mindfulness. And I'm a yogi and person who really believes in meditation, that we all kind of assess our own privilege, and that we remind ourselves that it is so often a luxury to be able to think complexly about, like, you know what, how do I engage and create more joy for myself? How do I ensure that I have a meaningful professional career, you know, and to think about, wow, if I want those for myself, or for my family or for my kids or my grandkids or my loved ones, can I also want and inspire and encourage that to happen for everyone in society? Doesn't everyone deserve that particular right? And moving more towards a society in which we, I think, petition and advocate for the individuals who are in our government to say everyone deserves to have access to this right and to this dream, to have a stable life in which they can become the best person that they can possibly be. And as cliche as that sounds, I think that should be a human right.
And I was wondering, like, that just reminds me, if you could kind of go back, we briefly discussed this, but there are certain ways that individuals can identify that do put them in a place of like more discrimination and just at a higher risk. So especially with like domestic violence, I know, and just vulnerable populations too experiencing homelessness as well, like veterans and
yes,
cycling out of the foster care system without
100%.
support. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to.
Most definitely. Although we know that interpersonal violence is no respecter of persons in terms of ethnicity, nationality, language spoken at home, educational level, we do know that people from certain communities are at a disproportionate, have a disproportionate impact and likelihood of maybe experiencing some form of interpersonal trauma. One of those factors is being exposed to trauma and interpersonal violence when you're a child. If you've experienced childhood abuse, incest, sexual assault, any of those things, that increases your likelihood. Also, if you are an immigrant, we know that a lot of times in this country, because of the surveillance and the difficult way in which the country has made an unclear pathway for paths to citizenship, in addition to the incredible cost of becoming a citizen, it's very difficult and people feel very vulnerable coming forward, and possibly a lot of times the person using violence against them will say that they will call ICE, or they will expose that they are not a citizen in this country, or they will take their children away. And so oftentimes individuals who either have a language barrier and or who don't have stable family and support systems, and I appreciate Aaron saying that, even sometimes someone who speaks the language that is in the community in which they're currently residing and they need help, if they don't have other support systems, in terms of if they're only there with the person using violence against them and their children, they don't have other resources they can go to for housing and shelter. For a lot of times they're not the primary breadwinner. And so if they're reliant on that person using violence against them because of economic insecurity and vulnerability, they're not going to risk not being able to feed themselves or their children, and will then choose that the best option for them and their children is to stay in a situation that is violent, right? The other thing that really I must talk about is individuals, communities of color, and also LGBTQIA communities. And so we know that our queer communities and queer communities of color in particular are also disproportionately likely to experience forms of violence and abuse. And that's not just, and I think it's important to say, not just from somebody who may be their intimate partner, but from the systems. And kind of like what David talked about, they have been criminalized and abused oftentimes in the judicial system and the educational system. Oftentimes they come from families who have not been supportive. And so finding those support networks that validate their mental health and their self-esteem, that they are indeed valuable people that have wonderful contributions to give to our society. The same thing for people of color, if they're experiencing police brutality or surveillance, if they're walking to Whole Foods and people are like, what are you doing here? Like all of these things that those of us with privilege take for granted, right? And so we know that those communities are more likely to not be believed when they share with somebody that they have experienced sexual assault or violence. We also know that they're more likely to not have access to resources from various systems in order to receive those kind of wraparound services that create the stability in which people feel more comfortable coming forward and sharing that they've been or are currently a survivor of interpersonal violence. So definitely communities of color who have historical inequities around oppression and racialization and trauma, immigrants or communities. One of the things I also like to share is that if you are a person who subscribes to Judeo-Christianity, that you are a privileged person, that it's each of us have privilege, and that if you are Judeo-Christian or Catholic, that it's on those individuals also with that privilege to support individuals who are Buddhist, individuals who are Muslim, individuals who don't have the same type of privileges around religion in this country, or are sometimes unfairly targeted because of their spiritual and religious practices, for those in that practice to speak up and speak out. And so I name those communities as really, really important, that those of us who maybe aren't a part of those communities or who have other types of privilege in those communities, be it if we are heterosexual or if we are individuals who have more socioeconomic privilege because of our education, to then stand with those who don't have those same types of resources in order to advocate on behalf of them. And not just to advocate, but to ask those individuals from those communities, how would you like me to support and ally with you in receiving the support services that you want? Because just like SAFE focuses on being survivor-centered, nobody knows better than a survivor what is best for them in terms of their safety plan, when it's safe for them to leave, if they choose to leave, what vulnerabilities they're going to. We have to continue to ask the person directly from the community that's involved in experiencing the most harm and danger, how can we support you?
Thank you. And that brings us to a conversation that we also had last week of it's really important to get to know the person that you're trying to be an accomplice for. It's really
Yes.
difficult to just blanket support somebody and be an advocate for somebody if you don't know you don't have to know everything about them, but if you don't know what their needs are, what their self-identified needs are, what their risks
Yes.
are, how they perceive their own mental health,
Yes.
as far as like diet, we talked a little bit last week
Yes.
about like it is beautiful that you like want to give out food to people that you see on the street, but oftentimes that's actually a lot more harmful, and it's not like the best way to give your services. So really like kind of giving your money to an organization that already knows how to serve people because they've had experience and they're professionals and knowing exactly like the diets, and they also have access to hygiene products. Our dental care is some like granola bars or apples can really help like hurt people's teeth, and then they don't have like health insurance to be able to go to a dentist. So all of those like little things that I think a lot of people don't think about are so important, and a lot of those things can be prevented if you just get to know somebody and talk to them and ask them, how can I be an accomplice for you?
Yeah, and so in the healthcare world, and this is a common term now that's getting, a lot of people talk about, is person-centered or patient-centered healthcare services, putting the person who's experiencing the health issue in the center, and then wrapping them around the support as a partner and listening to what their priority is. Just because we know that somebody has diabetes and that it's uncontrolled, that doesn't mean that's their priority and something that they want to address immediately. You work towards getting them there. You make them understand that that's happening, but their main priority may be that they just want to lose weight, or they don't understand that there's a correlation between losing weight and improving their diabetes, or that they have a rash on their arm. That's what they want to talk about today. They don't want to talk about the fact that their diabetes is uncontrolled. And so we have to listen to them and get informed by what they want and what their motivations are, and then work with them to partner to try and get the other things addressed as well. And that's the way we really improve their healthcare. We don't just throw pills at them and say, this is what you need to do. You have to do it, because if you don't, you're a bad person. That doesn't work. We know that doesn't work. It's a matter of partnering with them, making sure that they understand and letting them know that they can trust us. Like, we're not going to force you to do anything you don't want to do. We want to partner with you. And then we'll get to the fact that, we do need to talk about your diabetes at some point, but let's take care of your rash right now, because that's what's really bothering you, or this pain that you have in your arm or something like that. So I think that's where our system really needs to improve as well, is like listening to folks, partnering with them, not just making these assumptions or these decisions for them, especially in the intersectionality that Jackie can probably much more eloquently explain. But when somebody is experiencing family violence, and then we're also telling them, well, you need to get out of that situation. You need to be healthier. You need to not be hypertensive. They're losing even more power, and they're experiencing that every single day of their lives. Somebody telling them what to think, what to feel,
right.
how they look, how they're doing something wrong every single day, every minute of the day. And so then they come into a healthcare setting where a doctor then is telling them, well, you have diabetes. Why aren't you eating better? Why aren't you losing weight? They're losing more power. Or they know that they are in a family violence situation. And then we're trying to tell them, well, why are you sticking around there? We can't keep taking power away from people. If we keep taking power away, they're not going to improve what their situation is. The only way people change is when they decide that it's time for them to be able to make those changes. And so that's where being able to integrate with them in that way and partner is so important.
Thank you so much for saying that, Aaron, because then they're also more likely to trust the systems that have over time and through intergenerational trauma have violated them, right? And so if we can build partnerships in which we say, I'm listening to what your need is, over time, we will change the ways in which those systems operates, because the systems then are becoming patient and client-centered, as opposed to how can we make you do what we think is best for you.
Right.
Yeah, and especially with coming from specifically a counseling background, that person-centered approach being more coming from empowering the individual to speak about their needs. It really is about education and accessibility and empowering them and giving them options. Because if you ask, like, what do you need? Then it's like, oh God, I need everything. I need housing, I need food, I need insurance, I need to get my teeth fixed, I need glasses, I'm dizzy all day because I can't see straight. Hit on the back of the head 2 years ago. So I probably need a wheelchair for vitiligo, but I didn't know that like other people don't have those symptoms the same way that I do.
That's right.
So just it takes a while to build rapport, but just as Aaron was saying, like you really do need to have like case management and individualized like wraparound services in order for people to really enter into permanent housing. And yes, it matters where the funding goes and what organizations you support, but also it's about destigmatizing and having these conversations and the information that we learned today with like your family members or one or two friends who will listen to you. For some reason, like these types of conversations seem like really overwhelming or like unattractive and uncomfortable. But I think like the more that you can talk about it, like for instance, like with my family, there are a lot of like cultural barriers and a lot of things that like we don't agree on just because I was born and raised in the US and my family's like very traditionally Korean. But slowly but surely, like having multiple conversations with my family members, they're finally able to understand more of like why I'm choosing to spend my time advocating for topics that I think are really important. And then now they're doing the same. And so not just having one conversation with one person, but and not also like virtue signaling and just like pestering people to listen to you, but
change
conversations over time and incorporating it into like just mindful everyday actions that you can do. I think our goal here with this panel. And
I think that's really powerful. I mean, one of the things that SAFE really advocates is that change begins with us. It begins with us talking to our family members and our partners and the people we go to church with, and the woman next to me on my spin bike when we were able to spin next to each other. You know, it begins that way with saying, you know what, my daughter is in an unhealthy relationship right now, and I'm not sure how to talk to her about that. It begins with saying, you know what, 2 years ago, I actually went to foundation communities and they did my taxes because I didn't have the economic security to pay anybody. And I was in a vulnerable, like telling our truth and why we care about certain things humanizes the issues that we are most passionate about. And I believe that when we can see each other from a human standpoint and think about what we would want for, if not ourselves, the people that we love the most, hopefully ourselves, but even with the people that we love the most, we can then say, wow, maybe then I can also see why it's important that everyone have that opportunity and that access.
Thank you. Sorry for all the attendees who were here for the auction. We got a little carried away.
It was a great conversation.
Yeah.
Just, by the way,
It was. It's been great.
for this long.
But yeah, thank you. I just wish that I can continue talking with both of you for hours. You are both so just intelligent and empathetic, and I feel like I learned so much, and I'm so pumped up right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely like a heartstring conversation too, you know. I feel like it was an equal amount of like emotion, but also like here's some statistics and information and facts, and also let me yank at the heartstrings.
Yeah, and I think that's, I just so think I appreciate this forum because even I've learned so much, and I didn't realize that foundation communities have even expanded. So like recognizing that those of us who are in this work learned from our partners, and we partner with foundation communities all of the time, especially our case management team, but just the opportunity to be in the same room with individuals who care about this work and then individuals who work in this work, and it's just, it's made my heart sing. I'm like, this is why I'm in nonprofit.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's a really beautiful thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been wonderful.